Hey, Stellar Survival Dispatch. So earlier this month I put out a ham radio video and it was a little complicated. So I'm gonna try really hard to hardcore Barney this all the way to the bottom, okay? This is gonna be a video for people who know nothing about radios, who have never picked one up and never really even done anything with it, and an easy refresher for those of you out there that are experienced. So stick with me. So I'm going into this video with the intent that it's going to be one video. The reality is it's probably going to be like three. So I spent a bunch of time with the military teaching special operations and infantry soldiers how to find other soldiers with radios and do some stuff. So with that in mind, forgive me because I end up going down tangents and just really getting deep where I don't need to. So let's first off talk about the two major or three major radio types that you're going to find, what radio frequencies are, how to make your radio work, what you can use with and without ham radio certifications, and kind of go from there. When I was a kid, we would have called this a walkie-talkie. Nowadays, ham radio operators will call this a handy-talkie. So if you hear someone talking about a handy-talkie, it's this little mobile that you put in your backpack, your pocket, whatever, and it's run off of batteries. The next level up is going to be something like this. Ham radio operators would call this a mobile. I've got two of them here. I've got a ham Wuxen and a GMRS Wuxen. They're both attached to the same power supply. My negative's coming undone over here. Just because it's a mobile that's designed to go in a vehicle doesn't mean that you have to use it in a vehicle. Clearly this is attached to a base power supply station. I've got two of them attached to it currently. It's not made for two of them, but you can do that. Before I get into the third type, there is primarily ultra high frequency, very high frequency, high frequency. Yes, there is such thing as medium frequency, low frequency, X-ray, a bunch of other stuff. But for now, what you need to know about is HF, or high frequency, UHF, ultra high frequency, and VHF, very high frequency. And it goes HF, UHF, VHF. HF is the megahertz from 1 to 30. From 30 to 300 is very high frequency. From 300 to 3000 is ultra high. Having said that, we usually only use about 1 to 30, the 140s, 150s, and the 3 to 400s for what we're gonna talk about. So that kind of narrows it down where in the spectrum I'm talking. Having said that, I'm gonna come back to this, which is a lot of times people will take a mobile radio that's designed to go in a vehicle and they'll stick it in a backpack with some sort of battery and portable antenna. I have a homebrew J-pole for UHF and VHF, which we'll get into later, attached to this antenna, which gives me the ability to talk here in my house or stick this on my roof or connect it to a vehicle. The reason I want to use this big of an antenna is because it's going to resonate the most correct in the frequency that I'm using. Okay, moving on. The third type, and I don't have one right here, is a huge base station. You're going to see those for HF radios. You're going to see those for amplitude modulation type of radios. You will usually see multiple boxes. One of them is the base station, one of them is the amplifier, one of them is the antenna tuner, one of them's whatever. That gets into really complicated long distance, bounce it off the ionosphere type of communications. So dialing it back, today we're going to talk about handy-talkies or walkie-talkies and mobile radios. So now you know about the three radio types in general. So what do I suggest a brand new person use? Honestly, how much money do you have, right? That's always the case. One of my first handy-talkie radios is this Yaesu VX8R. There's 8DR and there's newer models. It was about $500 new. They're probably like $250 now used. The reason I wanted this is because one, it's waterproof and I was using it for elk hunting. And two, it has this remote attachable mic with the GPS device on it so I can do packet data and I can communicate with it in my backpack. The main purpose I have for this radio is elk hunting and talking with the other people that are out there or listening to the other hunters that are in the area. This is a little higher end. I knew I was going to use it a lot, and I spent a little more money up front, and I've had it for many years. There's a couple of my favorite high-end radio manufacturers. They are Yaesu and ICOM. There's tons of other quality radio manufacturers. Those are the ones that I like the most. If I have to buy a radio, my personal preference is going to be Yaesu, but that's also one of the more expensive radios. And then it kind of goes down from there. If you want to buy radios in bulk, Redivus or Baofeng make these radios. They're about 35 bucks a pop, depending on whether you're talking about FRS, GMRS, mirrors, ham, whatever, which I'm going to cover here in a minute. So radio selection, get what you can afford. Either get some $35 ones in bulk for everybody, save up a little bit of money, get a ham radio one. When you get the more expensive ones, you have more control over the options on the inside, more data banks for radio frequencies that you can program in it, more capabilities like packet radio and a bunch of other more complicated stuff. And it's waterproof and more robust, and you can change the antennas out. So those are the main reasons you would spend more money. And then cheap bulk, if you break it, you're out 35 bucks. You're not going to cry yourself to sleep. Those are the reasons that you would buy the cheaper ones. They both talk in the same frequencies. The higher end radios are going to be a little clearer and talk bigger distances. The lower end radios are going to have problems like sometimes you can't trade the antenna out. You just have to use what you've got. The chipset's not as sensitive, but you get what you pay for. So we've talked about radio types. Let's go into frequencies. Okay, everyone's listened to the radio in their car. 102.7, 99.5, whatever you're listening at. That's 99.5 megahertz, which is 99.500 megahertz in kilohertz. The decimal point is there because it's metric. Not technically, but roll with me on this, okay? The FCC has a website that you can look up the bands, and the bands are where we've all decided to operate our specific types of modes and communication devices. So if you want to deep dive that, look up ARRL band plan. It'll tell you what frequencies are used for what communication types and where. I'm not going to get into that. Let's talk just basically about what the frequencies are and how they work with the real world. So if I've got a radio frequency on the AM/FM radio of 99.5, this is really 0.99 megahertz, 0.500 kilohertz, okay? So let's not overthink this too much. But if I made my frequency 199.5, it's still 199.5 megahertz, which is 199 megahertz, 500 kilohertz. I can go down to my step size, which is 25 or 50, and it's still just in megahertz. Wazoo bandanas, they're also good for wiping off dry erase boards. So once I have a base place to start, the majority of those handy talkies are going to be in the 2-meter range at about 145-ish to 155-ish frequencies, okay, in megahertz. So understanding that, that's where the majority of ham radio communication is going to be. That's where the majority of emergency communications is going to be. That's where the communication from like a fire crew talking to a BLM airplane is going to be. And if you have a radio that's capable of listening to these frequencies, you can do the absolute majority of anything that a beginner person wants to do. Now that is in the 2-meter range. Why? Well, because the wavelength is the size of 2 meters. I'm not going to show you how to calculate that. For you advanced people, just take your frequency and divide by 300, and there's your answer. So the other band that we use is a 75 centimeter. This is UHF. Okay, ultra high frequencies. You might have 485.250. Again, this is just megahertz. You might have 495, 350. None of this really matters. What matters is that you understand that if this radio wants to talk to this radio, the numbers got to match. Okay, So make the frequencies match. Frequencies and channels, let's talk about that. GMRS and FMRS are a group of frequencies that we have put channel numbers on and decided that this frequency is for this channel. Without dipping into them, I'm going to do this from memory. Most of them are 425, 480, something. Doesn't really matter. But if I've got one radio on 485.250, I've got the other radio on 485.250, and I call this channel number 1. As long as the frequencies match or the channels match, they can communicate. Let's say 485.550 is channel 2. 485.550, channel 2. 485.650. 485.650. Channel 3, okay? Channels are just a name for a frequency. Once you got that in your head, a lot of this will make a lot more sense. The frequencies have to match or they can't communicate, all right? It's like languages. If you're speaking French and listening to Portuguese, doesn't work. The big difference between a ham radio and say a GMRS radio is that GMRS is pre-programmed.
Welcome. Channel mode.
With a bunch of channels. So this is channel 1, which is 462.5625. Channel 5 is 462.6625. So the GMRS is programmed with channel names on the frequencies. The ham radios, and this isn't a ham radio, but I'm going to use it as an example. You just need to know, write it down or program it in your bank, that the frequency for GMRS channel 1 is 462.56250. This is something you can Google. The frequency for channel 2 is whatever, right? So the only real big difference between a GMRS or an FRS radio and a ham radio is the fact that the ham radio, you have to manually put in every little frequency, and then you can label it whatever you want, like GMRS channel 1. And the GMRS radio can only speak on the 15 or 20 or whatever channels there are for GMRS. What this tells me is I want to buy a ham radio, learn what the frequencies are, and have multiple banks with different names so that my ham radio can talk to GMRS and FRS and CBs possibly, and COP radios and all this other stuff. But from a legality perspective, I have to get a ham license to do that. So if I want to get the entry-level stuff, I buy the FRS, the Family Radio Services. I buy the GMRS, government, if I'm remembering this correctly, and I'm probably going to screw it up, Government Mobile Radio Service. And the GMRS requires a $35 fee, and you get like 10 of your family members. So there's no test, you just have to pay for it, and then you can legally use GMRS. The ham radio, you have a 300 plus pool of questions, and you have to get, I want to say, 35 of them correct, and then you've got your ham radio license. But that opens up all of the bands that you can use. So we've covered some of the basics. Let's just talk about how the radio works, right? If you have a GMRS or an FRS radio, which is what most likely everyone's going to buy, you bought it from the store, it has the frequencies pre-programmed with the channels, it will only talk to other GMRS, FRS radios. So you turn it on, this is the PTT or push to talk button, that's how it makes a signal. Some of them are going to have extra buttons. These extra buttons, you got to play with them until you figure out what they do. This one turns the light on.
On. Off.
Oh, this is the weather channel on this one specifically. You're going to have primary and secondary functions. V is variable frequency oscillation. That means you're going to manually input the frequency. So if I push, well, mine's locked.
Unlock.
So if I push VFO
Frequency mode.
and I type in my channels with this Redivus radio, because it's GMRS, I can listen to channels, but I can't actually transmit on them because it's locked. So then I switch back to memory mode,
Channel mode.
or channel mode is what it's calling it. Then I have to actually dial through the channels. So there's channel 1,
2, 3, 4.
and they're only about 1/3 of a megahertz in difference because these are all GMRS frequencies with preset channels. So that's GMRS channel 4.
3, 2, 1.
Now, the menu button is going to allow you to do a bunch of stuff that you probably don't need to mess with if you're brand new. Before I do that, the A-B button is going to be the A band and the B band. So are we talking on 462.56250 channel 1 or 462.6625 channel 5? Well, we can listen on both, but we can only talk on one. So that's what A and B is for. Menu.
Menu.
The best thing you can do for the menu on your radio, because they're all different, is Google your make and model for your radio, then type in PDF, okay? So you will download the PDF that tells you all the settings for your radio. It's going to have menu channel 1 does this, channel 2 does this, channel 3 does this. Look in that on the user manual first, then go play with this, or it's just going to confuse the crap out of you. So if we have squelch, okay, squelch lowers the background radiation noise that's in the environment naturally.
Menu.
This is menu level 1 is squelch. 2 is the step. How far up do we want to go when I turn the frequency?
2.
Whoops. Let's go back to this.
Menu.
Transmit power, power save, voice activation level, backlight. Some of this should be kind of self-explanatory. Some of it doesn't really matter. All of the radios are going to have a secondary function, right? Like number 2 is the primary function, A, B, and C are the secondary function. The asterisk is a primary function, scan is a secondary function. Either you're going to push a shift button to get to the secondary function, or you're just going to hold it down. So if I want to get to the secondary function on this button, which is scan, hold it.
Scanning begin.
Now it's going to scan through all of the frequencies, 1, 2, let's see how far this goes up, 60. So there's 60 GMRS frequencies. I bumped the push to talk, so stop scanning. So that's how you would make it scan. If I want to lock it, I'm going to put it down on channel 1 again.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And I'm going to hold the lock button. I would do something like this because I want 2 radios to talk to each other, and I'm going to give it to my kid, right?
Welcome. Channel mode.
So I check that they are both high power. Channel 1 is bank A, channel 5 is bank B, and they're locked. Now my kid, unless they hold down the lock button, isn't going to jack it up. All they got to do is push the push to talk button. Check, 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 check. Turn the volume up. Oh, hello. And it's hard for them to screw that up. The biggest problem when you have a failure in communication is the person that you gave your radio to jacked something up. They didn't turn the volume up, or they unlocked it, they changed the channel, okay? These are pretty dummy proof. All you need to know is get the channels the same on all of them, push the push to talk button. This is the power and the volume, and this is the lock. If you can get through that basic level stuff, you can communicate. Okay, this video has been pretty long, so I'm going to go into more advanced videos in the future. If you can get the same radio type with the same frequency, turn the thing on, use the push to talk button, and lock it, your radio is going to work. That's the most base level that I can make it going forward from here. Okay, in video number 2, I'm going to explain to you what RF radiation is and antennas and how they work. Because everyone wants to know, how far can my radio talk? Man, that depends. Stick with me. Hopefully we will release video number 2 tomorrow, and we'll cover that stuff. Thank you for watching.